Now, Chay Bowes is a very dear friend of mine. He's a master of the arts of geopolitics. He's a political commentator and a broadcaster supreme with a bigger and bigger following. He's also an Irishman. So let me start by asking him in congratulating the new Irish president. She's anti-NATO. She's against the war in Ukraine. She's for an end to the war in Gaza. And she won by a landslide, Chay, as you predicted she was going to.
Yeah, George, thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure. I hope you're well, and Gayatri. Catherine Connolly's victory, I think it's got to be taken in the context of a European Union which is increasingly refusing to accept any kind of dissent. And that's what, in my view, makes this victory, this resounding victory from the Irish electorate. I mean, well north of 65% of the vote, I would say, voting for her. This woman, a very sort of ordinary lady, not a woman prone to bling, a Gaelic Irish speaker, interested in the arts, a seasoned left-wing, initially a Labour politician, leaving the Labour Party. But what's interesting about Catherine Connolly is that all of the left in Ireland united behind her to get her elected. And the election was a resounding success. To put it into context, the establishment candidate, a lady called Heather Humphreys, who is from the centre-right party Fine Gael. Now, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, as you know, but our viewers may not know, have essentially dominated Irish politics since the Irish Free State came into being and in the Irish Republic. They've dominated. These were two political parties that swore they'd drown in each other's blood before they'd coalesce together. They were Civil War enemies, but they have recently, in the last decade, grown closer and closer together. And now they are in government, making sure that the left-wing parties and any other progressive parties are kept out of power. So Catherine Connolly being elected by such a massive landslide is a huge, huge stone in the shoe now. Now, the Irish president has very little power other than constitutional power to represent the state abroad, to sign laws into law, if you like, when they're presented to her. But if she's like Michael D. Higgins, her predecessor, another left-wing man who was very supportive of the struggle in South America, Central America, for dignity and liberty, if she's like him, and I don't think she's going to be able to stay silent on issues, as you say, like NATO, neutrality, the war in Ukraine, the emergence of a militarized Germany, which he openly critiqued, saying that it was very similar to what's happened in the 1930s, what's happening in Germany. So she's shown that she's not scared to speak out. And I think I differ with her on some social issues. I would have been on the left in my youth, but not a woke leftist. And I've drifted further and further into the centre as I've got older and become more pragmatic, as you say, about unifying people around central pillars. But people have unified around her. And it's a huge message to the government, but it's also a message to the EU. And most importantly, in my view, it's a message to NATO that the Irish Republic, the people of the Irish Republic, have absolutely no interest in joining their blood-soaked endeavours, and we will at no stage be joining that cabal. And there's been a very insipid move in the centre, in these governing parties, in the political elites in Ireland, in the media, to try and fear. To deploy fear about Russia, about, we're all under attack in Ireland. And it's absolutely failed, which is a huge success. So I wish her all the very best. But it's very good for other people in Europe. You see Babiš being elected in Czechia as well. So it shows that democracy does work. When people get together and they bind around a single number of ideas, as you said prior to my joining, that it's so essential that we put aside petty differences and unite around specific rights and privileges. I mean, I recently, as you see, tweeted that Tommy Robinson was facing court under the same laws that you and your good wife were, penalised under illegally. These laws of the elites are the enemy of everybody. And what we have to do is we have to sort of learn to disagree respectfully and make the common ground in the welfare of our own peoples. And it's something we're forgetting to do. I think what you said is very, very pertinent.
We interviewed Sarah Wilkinson just before you, Chay, and she described what could only be described as fascist brutality. A woman treated in this way, Gestapo-like, 9 police officers, 9 plainclothes police officers. Jesus, we must have no crime of any other nature going on in Britain. 9 people manhandling a sick woman on her way back from the flotilla in hospital gear with no underwear on, searching her, bodily searching her, then tying her in zip ties, tossing her in a van, driving her hundreds of miles. I mean, it was almost unbelievable, the story that she was telling. You were taken off an aeroplane in Romania, where you were legally entitled to be as a European Union citizen and morally entitled to be as a journalist covering an election. You were treated in the way you were treated. I and Gayatri were treated in the way that we were treated. Europe is really going to the dogs, Chay.
Yes, and interestingly enough, I recently met the Romanian politician who I was arrested for going to interview. And a very vocal lady, Diana Soșaca, a Romanian oppositionist, regularly holding people like Ursula von der Leyen to account. And I met her, and she was so happy to see me that she embraced me and said, "Thank you so much for coming," because they were probably always going to try and stop you coming to Romania, because the Romanian election was stolen in broad daylight with the backing of the European Union, with the backing of Nato. The Western media completely turned its back, just as it's turned its back on your case, as it's turned its back on this victim interviewed before me. So we do live in this post-truth reality Orwellian world now, where there is no freedom for the enemies of freedom. This is the mantra that is echoing through Whitehall, through the White House, through Brussels, that anybody who speaks out in dissent against the machine is the enemy of the machine. And there's a singular truth and a singular narrative about Ukraine, about Gaza, about the imperial appetites for the European Union, for example, calls for a European army, calls for Canada now to join the European Union. This aggressive globalization is being deployed in a micro way, you could say, with your case, my case, the case of the good lady doctor, but also in a macro case, because we lack a free media. I've been recently researching BBC documentaries from the 1960s, 70s and 80s for a project I'm involved in. And the amazing amount of freedom for people to challenge the state in those documentaries is quite remarkable, given the sterilization of debate at the moment in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland. I have lived in Russia for the entirety of the conflict in Ukraine, in this phase of it, since 2022. I've been on the front lines. I've been in Bryansk. I've been in Kursk. I've seen so much. I've seen people killed. I've seen bombings. I've spoken to senior politicians here, opposition people. Not once has the Irish media asked me to attend a single television program. Not a single time. Not once has a single Irish radio station asked me to come on. I have a social media following which dwarfs the entirety of them combined on a global sense. I've more American people listen to what I'm doing than the entirety of the Irish population, but yet they refuse to allow me to come on to the airwaves in Ireland to debate with no notes, no assistance, alone. I've told them I'll attend anywhere to sit at a table with them to debate the realities about the engine and the germination of this conflict in Ukraine. They refuse to acknowledge I exist. And when you have a legacy media which is so aggressively deployed in the service of this propaganda by osmosis, everywhere people go in the United Kingdom, in Europe, in Ireland, they're pickled in this propaganda. And I'll round this back to Catherine Connolly's win. The fact that the Irish people came out in such numbers, it was a relatively small turnout, and many people spoiled their votes out of frustration. Also, that has to be mentioned. But the fact that they rejected this narrative is so heartwarming for us, on this side of the fence, the dissenters. And it does show that with organisation and with determination and platforms like you, it's not an accident, George, that you were singled out to be silenced. It's not an accident that I was, because we have become a stone in the shoe to this pernicious establishment. We don't always agree on everything, and we shouldn't have to always agree on everything. But it shows you that the mantra on the establishment globalist side is that you must agree with everything. The legislation under which you were detained illegally, in my view, is so draconian, as you say. If you don't answer the questions, you're guilty of a crime. You're not arrested, but you're detained. But if you leave, you will be arrested and detained. All of your personal belongings are stolen from you, essentially. And then you're left in this horrendous limbo, wondering what's going to happen next. It's quite remarkable. You're guilty, but not guilty. You are, but you're not. It's a terrible, terrible purgatory, legal purgatory that people are being put in. And you and I are far enough up or down the pipe, whichever way you'd like to look at it, that we have a platform and we can speak. But even in people's families, in the workplace, people are frightened to speak out now. And there's a name for that. It's called dictatorship, it's called fascism, and it's called the erosion of the very fundamentals of free European and British society. And I think, thanks to people like you, we can continue to get a platform to tell people of their rights. It's very important that people are aware of their rights, but it's also important to tell people that we do and can change things through the political system. And we have to continue to try to unite around certain pillars and rights and privileges, which are God-given, were hard-won in Ireland, in Scotland, in the United Kingdom. Our ancestors demand of us that we stand up for these freedoms, George.
A marvellous answer. Let's turn to the answer given by Vladimir Putin today. I'm getting the impression that the Russians have tired of the will he, won't he, will he, won't he, will he, won't he join the dance of the Donald Trump administration. They are tiring of these yapping chihuahuas and poodles and dachshunds of the European Union, and they are deciding that enough is enough. This unleashing of the mother of all cruise missiles that Putin did today, which is undeniably, like the Oroshenk before it, military game changer, I think that's a sign that the Russians are taking their gloves off, Jay. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think, look, what's most interesting is Vladimir Putin and the Russian state are deployed as this saber-rattling, incompetent bunch of lunatics who are at any moment about to unleash catastrophe on Europe, destroy our civilization, eat our children, when in reality, it's the rudderless elites in Europe, in particularly Brussels and in London, who are very much the true holders of that title. The Russians have been remarkably, in my view, reserved and restrained in the prosecution of this war, in my view. And I think people are tiring. I think you're right. The sense here is one of this roller coaster where Mr. Trump on a Monday will be going left. On a Tuesday, he's going right. On a Thursday, he's not going anywhere. And then he goes back to the end of it. Creating rationale and narrative out of created countries, created histories, then denying it, bringing Zelensky in. The Russians, are entertained by it initially. And it seems to me now, you're right, that they're losing patience with this process. And I wrote today that I think now that the Russians are starting to realize that the Americans maybe aren't that serious about ending this conflict. And remember, if the Americans cut off the arms supply to the EU now, the EU have nothing to give Ukraine. There's no money. The production is very low as America pushes China further and further. In another ludicrous way, the entirety of the United States military machine relies on Chinese rare earths. It's such a almost comedic position that the Americans are in, that most of their F-35 jets, critical components are from Chinese rare earths, as is their aircraft carriers, and a lot of their space technology. But yet they're saying that they're willing to go to war with China for declaring the ownership of China, which Taiwan is, which they agreed to in the One China policy. It's comedic. It really is comedic. And then you see Mr. Zelensky, this little dictator, trotting into the White House and playing this role of a statesman when he's like this sheepish 4-year-old visiting an uncle, hoping to get $1 in his hand. If he gets it, he's happy. If he's not, he retreats. It's quite remarkable, really. And the Russians are very serious people. They take the function of the state seriously. They take certain things very seriously. And Vladimir Putin has an exceptional capacity, it seems to me, to tolerate this foolishness and this unprofessional way things are done. But I think what happened was in the preliminary meeting between the foreign ministers, Rubio and Lavrov, my information and my sources would tell me that there was something of a breakdown during that discussion, that Mr. Lavrov, as has been the case since people say to me, what do the Russians want? I say, watch Vladimir Putin on the evening that he launched the special military operation. He will tell you exactly what he wanted then. It's exactly what they wanted now. The Russians have not deferred from their stated aims in Ukraine. And I don't think they're going to. I think Mr. Lavrov reaffirmed that to Mr. Rubio. Rubio wanted a ceasefire and then talks. The Russians have said, we're not going to let the Ukrainians off the ropes. As you say, Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, the Ukrainian army is in a perpetual collapse. And the Russians would be strategically, absolutely foolhardy to allow them to do that. So the Russians have stuck to their guns on that. And I think Marco Rubio is trying to express himself in a sort of, let's say, a geostrategically masculine way with Lavrov. I think he picked the wrong guy to spar with. I think he went back to Donald Trump and Donald Trump was then forced to back his guy, and then rescinded on this idea that there would be a meeting. The meeting wasn't cancelled because it hadn't been planned. That's another reality, which the celebrating Western elites press are saying, the meeting was cancelled. Zelensky made Putin or Mr. Trump cancel the meeting. It couldn't be more further from the truth. Zelensky is so irrelevant to this entire dance, if you like. It's almost comedic in itself. He had nothing to do with it. Zelensky is merely an appointed pawn by the United States. They could disappear him tomorrow if they wanted, much like in Vietnam, when the appointed leader was disappeared in a CIA-backed coup. Same thing could happen to Zelensky. He's very much irrelevant. But what is relevant is at what stage does Russia lose patience with the process? Because there's this perception in Brussels and in some parts of Washington that the Russians are going to drop to their knees because of some sanctions, or they're going to, begin to say, "Oh, sorry, we didn't mean it. Now, can we please do a deal?" They just don't know who they're dealing with. They don't know the Russian psyche, the Russian psychology around this thing. And there's also a perception that Russia is in a heated up fifth gear of a war economy. The Russians aren't even in a war economy, but they could be in a war economy. The Russians haven't done anything close to what Ukraine has done in mobilization terms of its military into Ukraine. They could do it. And I wrote today that the more this goes on, the more there's a sense, even among liberal Russians, that if we're going to be hung for a sheep, we might hung for a lamb, we might as well be hung for a sheep when it comes to Ukraine. We might as well take Odessa, which is a very sore point among a lot of the moderates here. And the other thing that people don't realize in the West is, and this is the most sincerely held view by me and many others who observe this, is that if you don't have Vladimir Putin, what you do get could be a far more hard-line leader. Russia has an exceptionally powerful military now who have, they haven't achieved what they've done without loss and without sacrifice. And the longer this goes on, the more the Russian public and that complex within the Russian political landscape, if you like, the more powerful it becomes. We've sacrificed them. They haven't sacrificed their children, their sons, their fathers for nothing, to walk away because Marco Rubio says there has to be a ceasefire, to allow the Ukrainians, who will tell you that it's Wednesday when it's a Friday, to rearm or to go about some nefarious business bombing here, there and everywhere in Moscow. So it is a very dangerous time, not because Russia will do something rash, but because Russia may dispense with the idea of accommodating the West at all. And if that happens, we may see what a full-scale invasion looks like. This full-scale invasion that the Western media has been telling us about for 3.5 years, you may actually see what that looks like. And believe me, I don't think it's something that you want to witness. And the nuclear cruise missile today, the Oreshnik, and the announcement of Vladimir Putin in a very uncharacteristically angry response when he was asked what would happen if they do strike Moscow. He said, well, the response could be overwhelming, maybe even devastating. Let them think about that. And then he walked away because he was probably a little angry. This was uncharacteristic from President Putin, in my view. And I think it defines the exasperation now that the Russians are feeling, and the Russian public as well, who are very vocal and very engaged and very animated when it comes to this type of stuff. As you well know, as being a man that's visited Russia and known the Russian psyche, they're quiet people, they're determined, they work under the radar, they move around in public quite quietly. But underneath the hood, there's an immense capacity to dedicate themselves to a goal. As we saw in the Second World War, this is the people that lost 27 million in the Soviet Union, 60% of which were Russians. There's a really dangerous selective amnesia in the West when it comes to Russians. They actually believe that the lack of a McDonald's or a bottle of Coca-Cola will impact on these people. They're exceptionally wrong. So it's a worrying time, George.
Fantastic interview. Thank you very much indeed. As always, Chay Bowes, a master of the political arts and journalist and broadcaster supreme.